Welcome to Santa Barbara Now. I'm your host, Assemblyman Angelo Santa Barbara. Today we have a very exciting show. We're going to be talking about Electric City immigrants and Italian Americans in particular. And joining me is Robert Piscucci, who is a PhD. I should call you Dr. Piscucci. But welcome to the show, Robert. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
And
pleasure to be here.
You have done a lot of research on Italian Americans in the city of Schenectady, the Electric City, and I looked through some of the presentation that you put together. A lot of work went into it, but tell us how you started this project and what interested you in finding out the history of Italian Americans in the city of Schenectady.
Well, this as you said, began as a research project for a doctoral dissertation at the University at Albany. Now, I was born and grew up in Troy, and I guess the question is, why did I select the Italians of Schenectady when there were many Italians in Troy as well as Albany? But I quickly found that the largest Italian population in the Capital District was in Schenectady by far. Much larger even than Albany, though Albany had a larger total city population. In fact, Schenectady's Italian population was the 7th largest in the state.
And I saw some of the numbers. The percentages were quite high.
Quite high.
In a 20% or so, or some even higher. But we talked a little bit before the show. My family came from Campania region, Caserta, but that is actually where a lot of the Italians that ended up in Schenectady came from. I think almost 60%.
Right. 60%.
And doing that research, finding that information was quite a task, and I saw what went into it. Let's go through what went into putting this dissertation together.
Well, to do research like this, since it's modern American history, you have the advantage that many of the participants are still alive, or their children are. So you have the possibility of interviewing these people. Of course, at the time that I did the dissertation, many of these individuals were in their 70s and 80s. One individual, Ettore Mancuso, a local politician, and also the editor of the Italian weekly newspaper in Schenectady that ran from the late 1920s until the mid-1930s. He was still alive, a World War I veteran. Amazing. Came to the United States from Calabria as a 12-year-old. Served in World War I and graduated from Albany Law School. Amazing. And I was able to interview him in the 1970s, shortly before his death.
And these interviews, and you had a lot of interviews and you had a lot of documents you had to recover. This is something that really needed to be done, because once this information is lost, it's lost.
It's lost, right.
Why, I guess the question is, and a lot of Italians ended up in Schenectady, and why is that? What's the reasoning behind that? I mean, those percentages are pretty high, and we talked about Albany, we talked about Troy. Why Schenectady? How did it come to be? Is there a reasoning behind it?
Well, it was not for the weather.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true.
It was not for the weather. In fact, it's been found not only in Schenectady by me, but throughout the United States, that probably 50% of all Italian immigrants returned to Italy. Most came here to work temporarily and then to return to Italy to buy some land to be a little more stable there. Not that they disliked Schenectady, but it was a place to come to earn money and then return. So some of these individuals and their relatives went to South America, some went to many other cities in New York State. But those who came to Schenectady, and you try to study the population, you quickly find out that it was a very mobile, particularly in the early years, a transient population. They moved in and out, some to return to Italy, others to move on to other cities in New York State.
And that's something you don't typically hear about, and it's great to kind of get the insight as to why people came here. My parents, I'm a first generation here, my parents came here for the work. My father worked at General Electric, and they came here to earn money, as you say.
Sure.
But we ended up staying, and now, I live here, my kids live here. But what percentage ended up maybe had intentions of going back? A lot of those families are still here, though, right?
Many of the immigrants, in fact, returned several times. They would often, if they were day laborers working construction, and probably close to 50% in the early years of Schenectady Italians were in that category. Work would end in November and not resume until April. So they found it often cheaper, instead of trying to live in Schenectady through the winter, would return to Italy because the price was about $25 for a steamship fare. So they'd spend the winter with their family in Italy and then come back.
And what was the situation, as part of your research, what was going on back in Italy that people were, was there just more opportunity, more work here? They were coming here to earn money to go back. They didn't want to leave the country. They wanted to go back home to their family. What was going on in Italy that they wanted to come here to work?
Though we associate this term with contemporary times, but it existed back then as well, globalization. With the introduction of the railroad, agriculture was now a worldwide economic event. And South Italy had a difficult time competing with American and Canadian wheat. So they found they could not make a living in southern Italy, and so they were leaving for many, many areas. Not only the United States, but Venezuela, for Argentina, Uruguay, and even Northern Europe. And as they continue to do today. My wife's father spent many years in France and many more years in Switzerland before finding work in Puglia in southern Italy.
And I know, you mentioned other parts, and I know we have relatives actually that are in Canada, and they ended up coming to Canada, but New York seemed to be where most Italians came when they immigrated over. When you interviewed, what was it like to interview some of the? Did some of the people you interviewed spoke only Italian? Were they still? Was it an Italian language, or was it just have they assimilated to English, or what was it like interviewing some of the previous generations?
Well, the people I interviewed were speaking English with a heavy accent. I wouldn't have been able to understand the Italian because many of them spoke dialect and did not.
And that's where I was going with this.
Did not speak Italian. I mean, to this day, throughout Italy, particularly in southern Italy, the people speak both languages. Usually with neighbors and relatives, they'll speak dialect, but with others, they'll speak Italian.
And that seemed to be a common thing. Growing up, I remember speaking the dialect, and I still speak it now. So the dialect was, it existed here, even though it came from, Caserta. It was spoken here, and it seemed like in the neighborhood, everybody spoke that same dialect.
Sure.
So you kind of knew that everybody came from the same area. And those dialects, tell us about the dialects. I guess the dialects are varied across the country of Italy.
Not only, well, they're varied even from town to town.
Well, that's true. Yes.
I mean, they'll identify someone as being an outsider who comes from a town 15 miles away, and people will laugh and say, "Do you hear his dialect? How funny it is!" And we're talking 15 miles away. It's been said that the Italian immigrants became Italian here in the United States. They arrived as Calabrians, Campanians, Purians, Sicilians, Sardinians, and then gradually they became Italian. We have to understand that Italy did not become a united country until the 1860s. That's only 20 years before Italians started arriving in Schenectady. So their affiliation, their identity, was not with a united Italy, but with a locality, a province, a town.
And I think what I found is that what I have found is that these, especially in Schenectady, a lot of the same traditions were just brought over. Everybody made wine, everybody made sausage, all the homemade foods, all these traditions were brought here. And it seemed like everybody, around that, when it was time to make tomato sauce. Everybody would do the same thing, and you can see families doing the same thing. These are things that were done back in the old country that were brought here and passed on into the city of Schenectady, and some people still do them now. I know my family still does them, and I'm passing some along to my children as well. That's something culturally that's been passed along from one country to the next.
You wonder what will be passed on in the future. Certainly the food customs. That continues to exist. That people will say, well, yeah, sure, we eat pasta three times a week. Unfortunately, the language is just one of the traditions that's lost very early. Very often, the children of the immigrants will not pass it on to their children.
And it seemed like, they tried to learn the English as quickly as possible. I was the first. I have a younger brother. I picked up the language. My brother did not. So it was from 4 years. We're 4 years apart, and already the English was prominent in our household, and my brother didn't pick it up. But you're right; it gets lost very quickly.
Quickly, sure.
If someone wanted to find the information that all this research, we're not going to be able to talk about everything here, but where would they find it? Is there a place where they can look it up on the website or on a?
First of all, I would say that, since I did this research some years ago, I would encourage young people, high school students, undergraduates to continue the research. There's much more to discover about the Italian history of Schenectady.
This is sort of just a start of it.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
But if they're interested in reading the research that I did, the county library here in Schenectady some years ago put the dissertation online as a part of their very wonderful digital library. So all you have to do is Google Schenectady Italians or my last name, Pascucci. I think it's easier just to type in Schenectady Italians and the dissertation will come up.
And I see, and your research covers 1880 to 1930.
That's right.
So certainly there's more than that. And even in recent times, there's plenty of
more
information that people can do research on.
Absolutely.
And I find it fascinating, the history, just because I'm part of this experience that you're talking about. My family followed a similar path as to the research that you've done. A lot of families in this area, share similar stories, and certainly your research is a part of that. So people watching, I would encourage you to look up the information. Robert Pascucci, a lot of research went into this. We've just scratched the surface here. We're going to take a short break here on Santa Barbara Now. Stick with us. More to come from Dr. Pascucci and all his research that he's done on Electric City immigrants and Italian Americans in the city of Schenectady. Stay with us. We'll be right back. The Autism Society of the Greater Capital Region has been a great resource, a great tool. If you look at their mission, it's exactly what it has provided for my family. It's a resource, it's a tool, it provides an avenue to advocate for autism awareness. When families have questions, they do the best to provide those answers. We're happy to be a part of this organization, and the Autism Society of the Greater Capital Region has been there for us, and they will continue to be there for families. Welcome back to Santa Barbara Now. We've been talking with Dr. Pascucci, who has done some fantastic research on Italian immigrants in the Electric City, in the city of Schenectady. We've been talking about the research that went into this this dissertation, and you had some live interviews with people. You did a lot of document research, and you've even visited. And I know you visit Italy regularly. You've even done some research at the Vatican, I understand.
Well, this was years after the dissertation. The dissertation was completed, and then a number of years later, I took a sabbatical. I'm a retired teacher and district coordinator of social studies for a suburban school district in Philadelphia. And at the time of the sabbatical, I spent a year, my wife and I spent a year in Italy, and most of that time in Rome. And while in Rome, I did some follow-up research. I was interested to see, well, what materials are available in Italy on the Schenectady Italians. So I did some research at the Foreign Office, but mostly at the Vatican's, at the Vatican Archives.
And what information was available? I guess that's the question. Was there information available?
There's a lot of information, because there are folders of information on the Albany Diocese and on just about every parish in the Albany Diocese. So why would information wind up in Rome from Schenectady? Well, very often people would have concerns. I'm talking about individual parishioners would have concerns, and they would write letters to the Pope. and the Vatican would save all that information. So it did give you a little different perspective on what was going on at Schenectady, because very often a lot of the material has disappeared. For example, it was very difficult to find even individual issues of the Italian newspapers. And there were at least 3. The only ones that I found in numbers was the so-called Record that came out in 1926 and ran to about 1935. That was a bound volume that the family of Mancuso donated to the University at Albany. So it's available on microfilm if you'd like to read the Italian Weekly. But individuals would often send copies of individual Italian Schenectady newspapers to the Pope, complaining either about the editor or about the pastor of one of the churches here in Schenectady and so on.
That's
so
amazing.
It's just fascinating reading.
Yeah, it's amazing to know that the name Schenectady is in Rome.
It's in Rome.
And it's filed away in the archives.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little more about the community here in the city of Schenectady. We talked about a lot of churches, Italian churches that were founded here. There's a lot of that culture was passed along. We talked about the food, we talked about the language, but also we see a lot of the things that were things that we would find in Italy. Now we begin to find them here as part of our history in the city of Schenectady.
Yes.
So the churches, what are some of the other? We also know that we have J Street, Little Italy. We have a lot of Italian restaurants, particularly in this area, more than other areas, and that's obviously evidence that the culture was passed along to this city.
Well, one of the traditions that continues here in Schenectady and Italian communities throughout the United States is the Festa, the annual festival or
How could we forget?
carnival
Yes.
associated with the church. And long ago in Schenectady, the residents who came from a little town called Alvignano in Campania, that's the region in which Naples is located, they formed their own organization or fraternal society. It's the only one in Schenectady that was based on a town in Italy, Alvignano. And they would join with individuals, Schenectady Italians, who came from neighboring towns to celebrate the patron saint's holiday, and his name, San Ferdinando.
And I
so
saw that, yes.
During the summer, every year, for years, it doesn't continue to the present, but St. Anthony's Festival does. They would celebrate the patron saint. And in Italy, in that town of Alvignano, they continue to have a street festival and procession from the church when they bring out the Blessed Virgin and a statue of San Ferdinando.
And you talk about the festas in there. I remember them since I was a kid. Every church, not every church, but a lot of churches would have the Italian festas. Mount Carmel, in the town of Rotterdam we have one, and St. Anthony's you mentioned, and the J Street Festival. These are all surrounding the Italian-American culture. And it seems like there's one festa after another, and I think they were actually larger than what we even see today. And these festas, I remember growing up with them, and certainly it's something that was celebrated back in Italy before they began to be formed here.
And they continue to this day. There's an interesting aspect of Italian immigration, and that is in Italy. Every summer, you'll find large numbers of returning Italians from the United States and other parts of the world returning to their hometown to spend a week, 2 weeks, visiting family. And they want to be there for the town's festival. They'll make sure they come back to celebrate that particular day, which often is celebrated in the United States, the same patron saint.
One of the things my parents have always said, when they lived in Italy, they didn't really get to tour. They didn't get to know the country. It was after they came here that they actually got to go back and actually see the country. And was that a common theme amongst the families that came here? It wasn't until they had come to New York, come to Schenectady, come to America, and then they went back and were able to explore their own country.
Yeah, I remember my grandmother saying that she saw Naples once in her life when she left her hometown in Molise, Campobasso, and took ship from Naples. That was the only, never saw Rome.
And my mother had shared similar stories with me
experience.
when they finally did go back and got to explore a little more. But I think, and what you said earlier on the first half of the show, is that people came here to earn money. And I think back then that opportunity was just not there. They came here for that opportunity to earn some money so they could be able to do some things and have a better life.
To have a better life, absolutely.
I remember, and we grew up in the Mount Pleasant area, and we lived in a two-family home, and I saw some pictures of a home that looked similar to the one that we lived in. Right. And it seemed like, that the Mount Pleasant area especially was a lot of Italians, and we all did speak the same dialect. And it was interesting. It's interesting that when we talked about the festas, we would go to the festas, and almost everybody, you could be assured, spoke Italian. So it was just a taste of culture, and it's nice to see that it is carried on. With your research, obviously it took a lot of work. You hope that people will pick this up and continue. What did you hope to accomplish with this segment of it? What would you like people to do with this information once they look at it?
Well, I was very pleased to be contacted by the Schenectady Historical Society. They put together last year into last spring a workshop, a seminar on the people of Schenectady, their origins, and they asked me to speak in March on the Italians and Poles of Schenectady. And I was so pleased at the number of people who showed up for the talk who were interested in their origins here in Schenectady. So the interest is there.
I think that, the interest is definitely there, and I think that if people have the opportunity to explore a little more, they would do that. And having this information is certainly going to be helpful to a lot of families, I think, that are interested in researching their history. It's all right here, and it's been compiled.
Well, it's not all here, but...
Well, a lot of it is here. A lot of
it to start.
And you also mentioned that you had to go back and search records, police records, and
yes.
You took all avenues. What other documents went into this research?
Well, I found that a particularly interesting aspect to, for example, to research the church records. So I recall at one point in the research, I went over to St. Anthony's, the Italian Catholic Church here in Schenectady, and the pastor very generously allowed me to take a look at the baptismal, the marriage records, and I told him that no names would appear in the dissertation. What I was interested in is trying to find out where the Italians came from in Italy. And the pastor, Father Michael Bianco, who many Italians here in Schenectady will remember that name, he recorded not only the province of origin, but also the town. And so I could take a sample looking at 10 years of marriages and figure out where Italians came from. And I found that 60% came from Campania. That's the region in which Naples is located.
And that's where my family is from.
That's
and
right.
It seemed like that was a lot of, and why do you think that is, though? Is it that some families came over and went back and shared some information about what was here?
Absolutely. It's called, historians call it chain migration. So you have a group of people who will arrive here in Schenectady. They'll write family and friends, neighbors, and say there's work to be had in Schenectady. Slowly, slowly, one after another, individuals will come to join them. So you'll have in an Italian community a heavy concentration of people from the same town, the same province. But so naturally it differs from one community in New York State to another. I mentioned to you that, all right, so Schenectady had a heavy concentration of people from the Naples area. Rochester, 50% came from Sicily, and nearby Utica, the largest percentage of Italians came from Puglia, which is the heel of Italy.
So as we go from across New York State, these percentages fluctuate.
They fluctuate. They're different.
And what we're seeing here, almost 60% from Campania, is just sort of unique to this area.
Unique. You won't find that in Utica. You won't find that concentration in Rochester.
And it's as my parents growing up, I remember my parents would run into neighbors and relatives and people that we knew, and it was all from the same town, same area of Italy, and that's how they ended up speaking that same dialect. Right. So we'd also find different dialects in these other cities. So from Utica to Rochester, there'd be different dialects of Italian spoken.
Dialects. Absolutely, sure.
We do want to share, so this information is available for people watching that want to research a little more. Obviously, we're not going to be able to cover everything, but you have a great slideshow. Let's give out that information again, where people can find this.
The dissertation is available from the Schenectady County Library as a part of their digital library. So they put the dissertation online. And so all you have to do is Google the words Schenectady Italians of Schenectady, and the dissertation will come up.
Wonderful. And there is a lot of information here, and obviously we can't go through it all here, but we just sort of scratched the surface here. But a lot of history, and it does cover that period of time, but hopefully somebody watching maybe will pick this up and do some more research.
Absolutely.
Do you hope to do some more research yourself on this at some point?
I've done a variety of these talks on the Italian and Polish community of Schenectady. I'm considering doing a talk on schooling the Italian immigrant during the same time period, maybe in the coming spring.
So we'll certainly look forward to that, that additional information. But in the meantime, there's a lot to look through here. If you hadn't had a chance, Electric City Immigrants, Schenectady Italians, you can Google the information, visit the library, and you can find more information on Dr. Pascucci's research. It is a unique document. Information that you perhaps cannot find anywhere else, because a lot of research went into it, a lot of one-on-one interviews, and a lot of documents that are really aged and almost impossible to find with any ease. But I want to thank you again for doing this research. It does mean a lot to me, being an Italian American here in Schenectady, and to my family, and certainly we'll continue to read through your documents. Thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this.
A pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Santa Barbara Now, and join us again where we'll talk more about people doing great things in our community, like Dr. Pascucci in his research on Italian Americans here in the city of Schenectady. Join us again on Santa Barbara Now.